Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. I'd been stirring it mindlessly for at least 10 minutes, the steam long gone, yet I couldn't bring myself to take a sip. I was too busy thinking about what my gut was telling me. Lisa's footsteps were soft as she padded across the kitchen tiles, her gaze cast somewhere just left of me. "Morning," she murmured, heading straight for the fridge. I nodded, unsure whether I should bring it up now or wait. It's funny how a simple greeting can feel like a game of chess when you know something is wrong. I watched as she took her time, pulling out the creamer, her movement slower than usual, like she was thinking about something else. I could almost guess what that something was. "So, you're working late again tonight?" I asked, my voice as casual as I could muster. Her hand paused mid-pour. She glanced up, her face a mask of innocent surprise. "Yeah, we've got this team-building dinner thing. I told you about it last week, remember?" "Right," I replied, forcing a smile. I looked down at my coffee, stirring again, hoping she wouldn't notice the tension that must have been all over my face. I remembered, all right. But last week, there wasn't this funny feeling in my stomach, the one that nagged at me whenever she said she'd be home late. "Do you need me to pick anything up for dinner?" she asked, breaking my train of thought. "No, I think I'll just grab something easy," I said, still looking at the coffee. "Have fun at your dinner." She hesitated, just for a second, then gave a bright smile. "Thanks. I'll probably be late, but don't wait up." She placed a quick, almost distracted kiss on my cheek and was gone before I could even respond. The second she was out of the door, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Something was off, it had been off for a while now. I wasn't one to pry or accuse, until now. That night, the house was too quiet. I tried watching TV, flipping through channels without settling on anything. A growing unease kept me from focusing on any of the usual shows. I picked up my phone, staring at it for a long minute. The question of whether to look at her messages weighed heavily, like a line I didn't want to cross but was almost compelled to. I put my phone down. "No," I told myself. "Don't do it. This was just paranoia talking." I took a deep breath and tried to focus on anything else, but every time I blinked, I pictured Lisa's overly cheerful smile that morning, the careful way she avoided eye contact. I hated the creeping thoughts, the idea of mistrusting the woman I loved. But it was gnawing at me. And when it's gnawing, it's hard to stop. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I picked up her tablet from the coffee table. She'd been so protective of her phone lately that I hadn't even thought to check the tablet before now. A message app was open, and it didn't take long to find the chat. I clicked through, my heart pounding faster with each word. The messages from Dan started innocently enough, jokes, updates, a few work gripes. But soon they became more personal, the kind of words that didn't belong in a conversation between mere colleagues. I didn't have to read much before the truth sank in. It was clear as day. Sitting there, I didn't feel the anger I expected. Instead, there was a hollow feeling, like someone had scooped out my insides. This woman who had once shared everything with me was now hiding a secret so big it could upend our lives. I closed the tablet, taking a moment to collect myself. Confronting her would be the natural next step. But then what? The prospect of throwing accusations and demanding explanations didn't appeal to me. I wanted something more. Something that would leave her feeling the sting of her betrayal as deeply as I did. The idea began as a flicker, and the more I thought about it, the more it took shape. I'd let her think she'd pulled this off, let her believe she was still one step ahead. I'd find a way to make sure she felt the weight of every single choice she was making, to give her the freedom she seemed so eager to have, just not on her terms. For the next week, I acted as though nothing was amiss. Lisa was her usual self, flitting in and out of the house, always with an excuse or a reason to be out. "Work's been intense," she'd say, or "I've got to help Dan set up a client proposal," as though she believed I was still in the dark. It was almost comical how easy it was to get information from her. All I had to do was ask casual questions here and there, and she'd reveal the details, fully believing that she was in control. Little did she know, I had already arranged my own plans. One night, as we sat on the couch after dinner, I brought up the idea of a weekend away. I could use some downtime, I said, keeping my tone light. Maybe a solo trip. Just a couple of days to clear my head. She hesitated, only for a second. That's a great idea. You should go. It'll be good for you. Her approval came too quickly, her relief too obvious. By the following morning, I had booked a cabin a couple of hours away. I made sure she knew about it, even accidentally leaving the cabin reservation email open on the computer. I wanted her to feel secure in her plans for the weekend, so she wouldn't see what was coming. And finally, the weekend arrived. As she left for her team-building event, I kissed her goodbye, watching as she got into the car. My mind was clear, my heart strangely calm. I'd told her I'd be gone by the time she got home, leaving her to assume I'd be miles away by the time she returned. But I wasn't going anywhere. After she left, I packed her things, separating them from mine, taking care with each item as though I were handling something precious. By the time her suitcase was filled, I knew exactly what I was going to say. And that night, I waited. I waited until I saw her location pop up on the tracker, showing her at an address that was nowhere near her supposed team-building dinner. I knew now what I'd suspected all along. The question was no longer if she was lying. It was simply what I would do next. Lisa came home late that night. I was sitting on the couch, phone in hand, waiting, though she didn't know that. I could feel my pulse beating in my neck, steady but strong, as I saw her headlights sweep across the driveway, heard the front door unlock, and the creak of her footsteps as she tiptoed inside. "Didn't expect you to be up," she said, her voice light but laced with something else. She pulled off her coat, hanging it over the chair in a rush, as though being too neat might reveal something. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, I was just about to turn in," I replied. My voice was casual, and if I played it right, she wouldn't have a clue what I'd learned over the last couple of days. "I'll be right up." She flashed a smile and headed down the hall. That was my first confirmation. The woman I'd married wouldn't have been so cheerful after a late night out with friends. But the woman who thought she had me fooled. She'd be thrilled, practically humming her way into the shower to rinse off her evening. And that's exactly what she did. The next morning, I laid my plan into motion. "You sure you're okay with me going away next weekend?" I asked over breakfast, feigning nonchalance as I sipped my coffee. "Of course," she answered too quickly, her gaze glued to her phone. "You deserve a break. I bet it'll be good for you to unwind a little." I nodded, hiding a smile behind my coffee cup. "Yeah, I think it will be. Just a quick trip. I'll head up on Friday and probably be back Sunday evening." "That's great," she said, barely looking up. In that moment, I knew she'd made her own plans for that weekend. She thought she had a green light, that I was conveniently out of the picture for whatever she and Dan had planned. The sheer audacity of it filled me with a cold, hard resolve. If she wanted to pretend nothing was amiss, I'd let her think that right until the very end. The week passed quickly. Lisa seemed more cheerful, relaxed even, now that she thought she had me distracted. She brought up my weekend plans often, eager to know when I'd be leaving, what time I'd be back. I had to play my part carefully, making sure every detail I gave her was just vague enough to sound plausible without actually committing to it. On Friday morning, I packed my bags and loaded them into the car. Lisa stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, smiling as she waved me off. I returned the gesture, suppressing the urge to tell her right there that I knew everything, that I'd seen through every lie. But no, I wanted her to live in her illusion a little while longer. The cabin was an hour away, nestled in the quiet woods of a small town where cell signal was spotty at best. I knew that was the place she'd be looking for me if she ever checked up on my alibi. And I'd made sure my location services were on, with a setting that kept my phone pinging every few hours. Lisa would see my phone's location safely tucked away at the cabin, and she'd feel free to act on her own plans. Once I arrived at the cabin, I made a point of taking a few photos. There was a lake with a small dock, and a rowboat pulled up on the shore. I took some shots of the scenery, even a selfie to really sell it, then turned on my phone's autoscheduler to send out a couple of pre-written text messages. I'd set them to go off at intervals over the weekend so Lisa would think I was at the cabin, enjoying a quiet, peaceful retreat. With that done, I packed up and headed back, carefully timing my arrival so I'd be back just as Lisa and her lover's weekend was underway. It was early evening by the time I pulled into my driveway, parking my car down the block where she wouldn't see it. I took a quick walk around the neighborhood to clear my head, giving her enough time to believe I was gone. By the time I returned, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the front of our house. Her car was gone, but I knew she'd be back. I had checked her messages again the night before, just to be sure. There it was, Dan, confirming that he'd be stopping by to pick her up for their little getaway. The texts were nauseating in their familiarity. He spoke to her as though I didn't exist, as though the life I'd built with her, the years of laughter, late nights, and promises, were nothing more than an inconvenience to their plans. After settling into my seat by the living room window, I waited. I didn't have to wait long. Within the hour, I saw her car pull up, her silhouette visible in the headlights. She stepped out, took a long look around, then gave the driver a quick kiss before stepping back inside. She had no reason to suspect anything, after all, I was supposed to be miles away, unwinding in a cabin. I watched her through the window as she moved around the house, probably gathering things for her night with Dan. Her relaxed pace, the way she floated from room to room, every movement filled with the freedom of a woman who thought she was getting away with it all. It was almost insulting. I waited another few minutes, then slipped inside, quiet as a shadow. I could hear her humming in the other room, moving around as she grabbed items from the kitchen and tossed them into a small bag. I stood just outside the doorway, my heart pounding in my chest, and waited until she turned and caught sight of me. The look on her face was priceless. Her eyes went wide, her mouth falling open as she froze, bag in hand, halfway to the counter. "Didn't expect to see me, did you?" I said, keeping my voice steady. She blinked, trying to find words. "I thought, aren't you? I thought you were at the cabin." I tilted my head, pretending to think about it. "Yeah, funny thing. I changed my mind. Figured I'd come back home, see how things were going here." Her face turned red, and she set the bag down slowly, trying to regain her composure. "I wasn't." I held up a hand, stopping her right there. "Let's not make this worse than it already is, Lisa. I know about Dan. I know everything." She stared at me, horror creeping across her face, her words evaporating. I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to make sense of it, to find some angle to work her way out. I didn't let her speak. "I've been watching you for weeks, waiting to see if you'd have the decency to come clean. But it looks like honesty wasn't in your plans." She dropped her gaze, her mouth opening and closing as though she had something to say but couldn't find the words. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're sorry?" I said, bitterness lacing my words. "What, exactly, are you sorry for? That you got caught? Or that you didn't get away with it?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I'm sorry for everything, for hurting you. I never meant for it to go this far." I scoffed, crossing my arms. "Funny how people say that, like it's an excuse. I never meant for it to go this far." "But you did." You let it get here because you thought I wouldn't find out, because you thought you could have it both ways. Well, guess what? You can't. She flinched, her gaze dropping to the floor, and for a moment, I almost felt a pang of pity. But I forced it down. She didn't deserve pity, not after what she'd done. Pack your things, I said coldly. Take whatever you need. You have until tomorrow to be out of this house. But, where am I supposed to go? She whispered, her voice desperate. That's your problem, I replied, my voice like steel. Maybe Dan will have a place for you. After all, he was so eager to have you all to himself, wasn't he? She looked at me, a mixture of fear and pleading in her eyes. Please, let's talk about this. We can work through it. I still love you. The words felt hollow, an empty plea from someone who realized too late that they'd gambled everything and lost. I shook my head, unable to believe she could even say such a thing. You love me? I asked, my voice low, incredulous. You don't even know what that word means. If you did, you wouldn't have done this. She looked like she wanted to say something, but I turned away, unwilling to give her another moment of my time. I walked back to the front door, pausing only once to look back at her. Be gone by tomorrow, I said, my voice flat. And don't come back. The next morning, the house was quiet, eerily so. I was up early, having barely slept, pacing through each room and filling a mental checklist of what I'd need to take care of once Lisa was gone. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting streaks of light across the living room floor. It should have been a peaceful scene, but instead, it was a reminder of how everything had changed in the span of a few days. Lisa hadn't come downstairs yet, probably hoping I'd leave first, sparing her the discomfort of actually facing what she'd done. I wouldn't give her that luxury. Not today. She had insisted on going out with Dan, sneaking around, and lying to me. The least she could do now was look me in the eye one last time. I heard a door creak upstairs, followed by quiet footsteps descending the staircase. Lisa appeared at the edge of the hallway, her hair tied back, face pale. She was dressed in old jeans and a t-shirt, looking like someone bracing for a funeral. Morning, she said quietly, barely looking at me. I didn't respond. Instead, I nodded toward the small stack of boxes I'd set out by the front door. These are your things. Everything else is still in the bedroom. I figured you'd want to pack that yourself. She gave a small, jerky nod, her gaze sliding over to the boxes before quickly looking away. You have a place to go? I asked, more out of obligation than concern. She looked away, her face tight. I'll figure something out. Does Dan know? The words came out sharper than I'd intended. No, she whispered. I told him I'd need some time. I raised an eyebrow, biting back a sarcastic reply. After everything, she was only now reconsidering things with him. But I didn't want to get caught up in the whys anymore. That path led to questions with answers that wouldn't change anything. Lisa shifted uncomfortably, clutching the straps of her empty duffel bag. Can we talk? She asked, her voice hesitant. We've already talked, I replied, my tone hard. There's nothing left to say. Her eyes flickered with hurt, but she stayed silent, likely sensing it was useless to push. She walked over to the boxes, took a shaky breath, and picked one up. For a split second, I almost stepped forward to help her, but I stopped myself, clenching my fists instead. She had made her bed, now she had to lie in it alone. One by one, she moved the boxes to the car. I followed her with my eyes, watching as she loaded them with stiff, robotic movements. When she finished, she turned back to the house, her gaze lingering on me. I'm sorry, she said, almost inaudibly. I don't know what else to say. I looked at her, searching for a trace of the woman I'd once loved, the woman I'd built a life with. But all I could see was a stranger. Don't say anything, I replied coldly. Just go. She nodded once, defeated, and walked out the door, leaving it open behind her. I watched her get into her car, watched as she sat there for a moment, her face hidden, and then drove off without looking back. When she was finally out of sight, I closed the door, the click of the lock echoing through the empty house. I leaned against the door, feeling the weight of everything settle over me. It was done, she was gone. I had taken control, had made the decisions, and now I was alone with nothing but my thoughts. The first few days after Lisa left were a blur. I cleaned out the closet, packed up the remaining items she'd left behind, and started rearranging the house. I threw away anything that reminded me of her, the small trinkets she'd collected from our vacations, her favorite mug, the old throw blanket she'd kept draped over the couch. Piece by piece, I dismantled the physical reminders of our life together, trying to purge the pain along with them. It helped, for a while, to keep busy. But there were still moments, quiet moments, where the emptiness crept in, filling the silence left in her absence. At night, I lay awake, staring at the empty space beside me in bed, feeling the ache of betrayal gnaw at me. I replayed our conversations, her lies, the countless moments I'd missed the signs. How had I been so blind? How had I let things get to this point? One evening, a few weeks later, I received an unexpected message. It was from a mutual friend, someone who had apparently heard about the split and reached out to offer their sympathy. "If you need anything, let me know," the message read. It was a simple gesture, a small kindness that reminded me I wasn't completely alone. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to spill everything, to let someone else carry a bit of the weight, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I thanked them and closed the message, feeling the familiar pang of isolation settle over me again. Over the next few days, I tried to ease back into some semblance of normalcy. I went to work, focused on my projects, and even joined a few colleagues for lunch. I pushed Lisa to the back of my mind, determined to move forward, one step at a time. But no matter how hard I tried, there was always a part of me that remained tethered to the past, bound by the memories of what had been and the anger over what had been taken from me. Then, one day, I received a phone call that threw me back into the center of it all. It was Lisa. I stared at the phone, her name flashing on the screen, my heart racing as I debated whether or not to pick up. I almost let it go to voicemail, almost convinced myself I didn't need to hear her voice again. But curiosity, and maybe a hint of something else, won out. "Hello?" I answered, my voice as steady as I could make it. There was a pause, a moment of silence filled only by the faint sound of her breathing. "It's me," she said softly. I just wanted to see how you were doing." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. How I was doing. She had ripped my life apart, left me alone in the ruins, and now she wanted to know how I was doing. "What do you want, Lisa?" I replied, my tone colder than I'd intended. She hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "I know I hurt you. I know I messed up. But I don't know how to fix it." "There's nothing to fix," I replied sharply. "You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." She was silent again, and I wondered if she would hang up. But she didn't. "I lost everything," she whispered. I thought he loved me. I thought he'd be there for me. But he left." I closed my eyes, the familiar anger bubbling up inside me. The last thing I wanted was to hear about her troubles, to listen to her try and paint herself as the victim in a situation she had created. But a part of me, some part one didn't want to acknowledge, felt a twinge of satisfaction. She had chosen him, and he had left her. She was finally facing the consequences of her betrayal. "That's not my problem," I said, the words harsh and unforgiving. "I know," she replied quietly. "I know it's not. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I didn't respond, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of it all. I wanted to tell her to never call again, to let her know that her apologies meant nothing to me. But in that moment, all I felt was a strange, hollow emptiness. "You got what you wanted," I said finally. "You got your freedom. Now use it and stay away from me." I ended the call without waiting for her response, my hand shaking as I set the phone down. The anger I'd felt was gone, replaced by a quiet, heavy sadness that settled over me like a shroud. Lisa was out of my life, and there was no going back. But instead of the satisfaction I had expected, all I felt was the hollow ache of loss. In the days that followed, her call stayed with me, haunting my thoughts even when I tried to push it aside. She was out there somewhere, alone, facing the reality of her choices. And even though I knew I shouldn't care, there was a part of me, a small, fractured part, that couldn't quite let go. I didn't hear from her again after that. She had finally respected my wish, and for that, I was grateful. But every now and then, in the quiet moments of the night, I found myself thinking back to that conversation, wondering what might have been if things had turned out differently. And as the days stretched into weeks, I found myself finally, truly alone. Weeks passed, and the silence in the house felt heavier. Each day, the memories I tried to push away came creeping back in unexpected moments, the way Lisa used to laugh when I told a bad joke, her slippers by the bedside, the lingering scent of her favorite perfume that somehow hadn't faded from the closet. The resentment that had fueled me through those first days of her absence was beginning to dissolve, leaving behind a hollow space I didn't know how to fill. I tried to keep busy. I took up running in the mornings, pushing myself harder and farther than I ever had before. I spent weekends on house projects, repainting walls, moving furniture around. Anything to avoid sitting alone in the silence. But no matter what I did, nothing filled the quiet. One evening, just as the sun was setting, a letter arrived. There was no return address, just my name scrawled on the front in familiar, looping handwriting. My heart clenched when I saw it, an instinctive pang of dread and something that felt almost like hope. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope for what felt like an eternity before I finally tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, filled with her handwriting. Her words were rushed, as if she'd written them in a hurry, afraid she'd lose her nerve if she slowed down. I took a deep breath and started reading. "Dear Tom. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I've spent days, weeks, debating whether to write this at all. You asked me to stay away, and I should respect that. But there's something I need to tell you, something you deserve to know. I didn't reach out before because I thought I could handle things on my own. I thought I could fix the mess I'd made, pick up the pieces, and somehow start fresh. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. Dan was never there for me the way I thought he would be. He was only a fantasy, something to escape to. I see that now. But by the time I realized it, I had already ruined the only real thing I ever had. I know it's too late to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But you should know that I am sorry, Tom, more than I can put into words. I wish I could go back, but we both know that's impossible. I just wanted you to know that, even though I messed everything up, you were the best thing in my life. I don't expect you to believe me, but it's the truth. Please don't think I took it all for granted. I just got lost along the way. Take care of yourself. And if you ever find someone who makes you happy, don't let them go the way I let you go. Goodbye, Tom. I'm sorry. With all my love. Lisa." The letter slipped from my fingers, landing on the table as I sat back, numb. There were so many things I wanted to say to her, so many emotions tangled together in my chest, but she was gone. I'd asked her to leave my life, and she had done just that. I didn't hear from her for months after that, and as the days wore on, I found myself returning to her words, feeling the echoes of our life together. The anger, the betrayal, they were all still there, but they had softened, fading into a dull ache. It was only in the absence of it all that I realized what I had lost. One night, I got a call from her sister, Sophie, someone I hadn't spoken to since Lisa and I separated. The moment I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. There was a heaviness to her words, a hesitation that set my pulse racing. "Tom," she said softly. "I'm sorry to tell you this over the phone, but I thought you should know. Lisa, she's gone." The world seemed to blur around me. I barely registered her words as she explained what had happened. Lisa had taken a trip, maybe to clear her mind or escape the wreckage of her life. On a winding, rain-slicked road in the mountains, her car had slid off the edge. By the time help arrived, it was too late. The weight of it hit me like a tidal wave, crushing the breath out of me. She was gone. She was really, truly gone. The anger, the resentment, the bitterness, they all vanished, swept away by a wave of grief so deep I couldn't find words for it. I spent the days after her death in a daze, moving through the motions of life without really feeling anything. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb, filled with the ghosts of our memories and the quiet, painful reminders of what we'd lost. A few days later, another letter arrived. It was from Sophie, who'd found it among Lisa's things. Her sister had hesitated to send it, unsure if I'd want to read it, but ultimately decided I had the right to see it. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter, unsure if I was ready to confront the words she'd left behind. "Tom. If you're reading this, then I guess I couldn't find the courage to say it to you in person. I'm leaving because I don't know how to face you after everything I've done. I hurt you in ways I can't even fathom, and there's no way to fix that. Maybe it's selfish, but I can't stand to see you look at me the way you did that day, the disappointment, the hurt. I wanted so badly to make things right, but I don't know how. You deserved better than the woman I became, better than someone who betrayed you. I hope, one day, you can remember the good times. I hope you find a way to forgive me, even if it's only a small part of you. Please take care of yourself. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I hope you find happiness again, even if it's with someone else. With all my heart. Lisa." I sat there, the letter clutched in my hands, tears streaming down my face as I read her final words. The anger I'd felt for so long evaporated, replaced by a deep, overwhelming sadness. She had been lost, caught up in something she didn't know how to escape, and in the end, she'd paid the ultimate price for it. The silence in the house was suffocating, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street, and thought of all the memories we'd shared, the life we had built together, and the woman I had loved, even when I had tried to convince myself I hated her. I would never have the chance to forgive her face to face, never be able to tell her that, despite everything, I wished her peace. All I had now were her letters and the memories of what we once were, a bittersweet reminder of love lost and the price of betrayal. And as the night crept in, I sat alone, clutching the letter to my chest, haunted by the ghost of a woman I had loved and lost, and the aching, quiet knowledge that she would never be coming home.